Against All Odds family, welcome once again, and thank you for taking time out to watch the show. Today, our guest for today is Darren Weston, and Darren is here to share with us his Against All Odds story. Darren, welcome.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. The pleasure is all ours. We're excited to have you here. So Darren, do you want to tell us a little bit about your situation right now before we go back in time?
Sure, yes. So kind of related to the story. So now at the end of the story, or hopefully not the end, but at this point in my career at least, yeah. So I'm the Vice President of Integrated Data Analytics and Reporting and Janssen Clinical Innovation at Johnson & Johnson. So a corporate executive working in the pharmaceutical sector.
Sounds very fancy.
Yeah, it's all data related. Obviously, data's a big thing these days, and it's a kind of collection of data operations functions that all work kind of integrated to support the research and development efforts for Johnson & Johnson.
Awesome, awesome. But life hasn't always been this fancy, has it?
No, it hasn't.
Yeah. Shall we go back to you growing up? Do you want to tell us a bit about that? So you grew up in some of the toughest neighborhoods in London.
Sure, yeah. So in terms of my journey, I was born in Barking Hospital. Grew up in East Ham, Barking and Dagenham areas of kind of East London. And from a young child, we moved around a few different forms of council housing. I think you would refer to it as kind of project housing in the US. And most of my memorable years were living on what was called Scrutton Terrace Council Estate. Which was so in England, projects were built around communities. And so they created this community in Barking, just off the A13. I had many happy memories, but lots of kind of memorable moments living there. Barking at the time, for those who don't know, Barking was home to several kind of relatively you call high crime council estates. There was the notorious Gascoigne estate, which kind of counted Scrattons. There was Goresbrook Flats. Many of these areas kind of they're somewhat notorious for not being the most desirable places to live. But I'll be honest, but these were the areas that we played, on our bikes. We played football with our friends. We used to, back in the 80s, do break dancing with other groups. We had a lot of, I'll be honest, it was a lot of fun. But at the same time, obviously, when I look back, my memories of those of happy, loving family, a lot of extended family. But I look back on the situations perhaps and realize that maybe they weren't necessarily normal in the sense that I would imagine now. So lots of things happened during those periods.
It's funny because I went to uni in London, and you talk about Goresbrook estates and Gascoigne, and I remember it so well as a student partying there, and I don't recommend anyone letting their children school do uni in London at least. But yeah, these were some of the areas some of the places that we went partying, and it was a lot of fun back then. So you just took me back memory lane in the Barking and Dagenham area. Now, just to give people what sort of crimes that you may have witnessed as a young child, do you want to tell us some of the stories, just to give people an idea of what living in these places were like? What were some of the things you saw?
Yeah, so as I say, when I look back, my childhood and some of the things I witnessed, realizing they're not necessarily the normal thing that you would expect. But I remember walking home from school, and we had like an underpass, what we call a subway in England. And seeing a man laying naked, unconscious, having been attacked. He actually had his work tie shoved down his throat and been made unconscious. And being kind of like a 10-year-old boy and seeing those types of situations were pretty bad. I remember moments where my mum coming back crying, walking home from a Weight Watchers meeting, having been attacked in that same underpass. Luckily, my mum was a pretty fierce lady and actually beat the attacker quite severely.
Oh, wow.
And I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. But my mum, having grown up in those areas, was at least somewhat comfortable with protecting herself. But still, I remember as a kid being quite upset by those moments, seeing, and I remember my younger brother getting a milk bottle smashed in his head, all these kinds of things happening. But I remember burglars. One time, a burglar being chased from my home, in my home, and jumping out of the front window in the house as they were in the middle of robbing us. But yeah, so numerous kind of exposure to what you would call serious violent encounters, some involving family members. But one thing that really stands out as kind of unique was like exposure to gang leaders who were quite notorious and pretty savage backstories. And the funny thing is, these are people that were kind of core leading members of our community. They either led like social clubs or owned businesses or whatever. And actually, my memories of a child, as you know, I won't name names, but of one of these people actually being quite friendly. I remember sitting on his knee, giving me money at Christmas. He used to give kids a small gift at Christmas.
Wow.
And so, growing up in this environment where you're in that inner circle of because he's there almost somewhat like protecting that community. There was actually one time where some travelers basically took over our kids' play area with their cars, caravans, etc. And my mum immediately went to this gang leader and complained and said, "Yeah, the kids have nowhere to play. Like, what's going on? You're supposed to be looking after this area. What's going on?" Later that evening, it all kicked off, and the travelers were gone by the morning. So it's kind of like, so even though some of the things are terrible, I also got the sense of what it felt like to live within that community, not just on the peripheries of it. So yeah, looking back now, obviously living in the sleepy, affluent area of Mendham, New Jersey, I look back and realize they're quite unique experiences, although they were kind of my normal.
So you talk about them giving you gifts at Christmas and stuff. Just from movies that I have seen, was that their way of grooming you, sort of, making you comfortable with them, or not necessarily?
No, I don't think so. I think it was more that I don't know. I mean, I would guess that a part of it is that if your community doesn't support, if you don't, I mean, in general, it's like almost like a form of protection money, I guess. It's kind of in the sense that if you look after the community you live in, your community will look after you. And so, yeah, I mean, in a sense, I'm sure that these people were looking at the broader communities, people that could vouch for them or alibis or whatever. And so there was just this concept that actually they had families, they were, seen as community people, even though some of the things, or business dealings or things they got involved in perhaps were not fully kosher, or actually may have involved even potentially murder and things of that nature. Like, they were pretty serious crimes, but yeah, but it was weird being in an environment where you knew that. I mean, as a 10-year-old boy, I knew that these people were accused of things of that nature. That in itself was a strange situation, I suppose, when I look back on it now. But
so they were doing all these things, but not in the community. They protected their community, but
Correct.
all of these things kind of happened outside. That is strange. That is interesting. So how did growing up like this shape you into who you are today? Tell us the good and the bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a good standpoint, maybe we haven't touched on that, but the first one would be kind of my cultural diversity and just general awareness. So again, for those who don't know, that area of East London is pretty diverse. And the school I went to, in the classes I was in, I was one of only actually a handful of like white kids in my class at school. So I grew up with a broad range of school friends, a lot of kids from the Indian subcontinent backgrounds, Ghanaians, Nigerians, Jamaicans, a huge range. So as a kid, that was normal to me. That wasn't strange. And so, and everything that comes with that, whether it's the smells in people's kitchens are different from home to home, and the kids, different levels of discipline in homes and all this, you got to witness that. And I think that when I look back now, that made me so much more aware of different cultures from a very young age without it being a forced thing. It just was like, yeah, these are my friends and these are the kids I hang out with. So I think from that standpoint, that was a huge piece. I think there's an element of toughness or resilience. I think to survive in that type of area, you need to be able to back yourself up. Otherwise, you'll be preyed upon. And so I think definitely that gave me an element of toughness to get through difficult moments. There's numerous situations I can think of that were tough moments, and you had to really stand up and be counted. Otherwise, you could be in trouble. So I think I would say inside me, there's a little bit of that toughness that's come from that, but also a reality check. I think, and I share this with my kids a lot, but when you think things are bad, they aren't really that bad. And that's something I share with my kids a lot, probably much to their annoyance. But yeah, and then maybe the other piece from a good standpoint would be that your background doesn't really define you. I think that's something that I
I
look
love
on
that.
now, particularly. And then from a the bad, maybe you know, I'm a positive person, so I would say, like, in general, anything you perceive as bad is just an experience, and overall, these experiences are all a blessing, and they just, you know, they make you the fabric of who you are. But if I look back at my schooling, I think I realized how poor and uninspiring it was, and actually, that makes me feel sad for kids growing up in those areas. So yeah, overall, I think my experiences maybe keep me humble and appreciative of what I have. It does make me think about, yeah, people in those difficult situations. Not everyone has the chances to get out of those situations, and I think the schooling system is such a crucial element of helping kids move forward. And I think, yeah, my experience back then in the 80s, those schools were not the most inspiring place to be.
Yeah. So, guys, I need to tell you that when Darren talks about, cultural diversity and how aware he is, there aren't many white men that you come across that spot you and immediately realize that you are from Ghana. And you actually know the difference between Ghanaian jollof and Nigerian jollof as well. Which I thought was quite funny. But yeah, that's awesome. And so you moved away from these areas at the age of 12, though. Was it your parents' desire to move you away from all of this, or what happened there?
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, yeah, you got to remember, my parents grew up in those areas, so that was kind of their normal for them.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, all our grandparents, you know, uncles, aunts, cousins, etc., all lived in the East London, Essex area. So to be honest, moving was probably quite a tough choice for them. They were moving away from a lot of that family networking structure. But
Yeah.
my dad was always quite aspirational, and he took up an opportunity. He was working with ICI at the moment in their Dulux paints division, and made the decision to take on an opportunity moving about 45 minutes away to the Medway towns in Kent, as they were setting up a new plant over there, and he was going to play a role there. So we moved house to All Hallows on Sea, which is like a sleepy working class village on the coast, kind of where the River Medway meets the Thames. And yeah, probably obviously a stark difference from Barking, you know, and certainly no gangs or high levels of crime and stuff, but did suffer many similar issues in terms of that lack of inspiration. Maybe people just kind of happy with where they are, and wasn't the most inspiring place. But yeah, and sadly the move didn't work out. And actually, yeah, the plant didn't end up opening shortly after we moved there. So yeah, my dad was made redundant shortly after we moved, which was was a tough time.
Wow. And how did that affect you? Because you went through periods where your dad and your mom were both not working. How did that affect you growing up?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, firstly, I got to see the mental impact of such situations on a family. I think it was tough on both my mum and dad, but you know, my mum particularly went through periods of depression, and I question whether she would have gone through those things, potentially, if that stress hadn't been put on her. But overall, yeah, my experiences probably keep me humble, appreciative of what I have now. But it was tough. I mean, I can remember, yeah, the moments where you feel, and maybe people even act as if you're not that important or you're not as good simply because you have less. And knowing what that feels like is kind of, yeah, I would say I can still even evoke the feelings inside. It was a
Oh,
sad
wow.
time. Feeling embarrassed or ashamed because you can't afford maybe like just a couple of pounds to go out with friends, and being able to, and having to explain that, or always coming up with an excuse on why you can't do something, but actually the real reason is simply you don't have no money.
Money.
And yeah, and that carried on, I'll be honest, for yeah, that carried on for a long, you know, that was a number of years that I was in that kind of mode. And so you get resilient on how to come up with good stories or how to front things up. But yeah, but it is embarrassing at times. And yeah, so I'd say that they're the main things I kind of, when I look back on it, they're the things that yeah, I didn't like at the time, and I would say
Right.
made me feel uncomfortable. But you learn to be resilient and learn to also be thankful of what you do have.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was tough times for sure.
Absolutely. Do you think the feelings that you got from these experiences, do you think that helps spur you on as well? As in, you don't want to ever go back to that situation? Because I know of people that are like, I don't want to ever go back to being poor. Do you
Yeah,
think? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there was periods of anxiety where I always felt like, what if I can't get a job? Or like, what if I end up like this? And so there was a part of me that was like, I am absolutely determined to not be in this situation. And even times I probably frustrated my parents because I would say like, I will never let this happen to me. Or like, I would, and obviously not understanding the full situation for them, but definitely was a strong aspect of my drive and work ethic, I
Yeah.
would say, in later life for sure.
But then that's a good thing. It's a bad experience that you turned it around for your good, instead of saying that, this is my situation, woe is me, whatever,
Yeah.
you used it to spare you on. So you mentioned, Darren, that you were a good sportsman as well. What sports were you playing, and what were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, from a young age, I was always pretty athletic. As a young kid, I did gymnastics and running, sprinting, track and field, football, soccer.
Oh,
So I had lots of sporting passions, but soccer and athletics were probably my main ones. I mean, I always look forward to sports day at school because I would pretty much rake in most of the events, and I would like sometimes do like 6, 7 of events, as many as I could. But I got to compete, at high school, and I was competing in kind of regional and county events for 100 meters, 200, 400. Obviously,
oh,
nowhere near the level of Peter, your previous guest, but I had school records for a number of those events. So I was always a pretty fast sprinter, and then for football and soccer, yeah, played on several teams, and I never really had the technical training. I mean, I was a park player. I played with friends and kids and older kids that played at really good levels, and so my speed and power and early onset of puberty, if I'm honest, gave me a real helpful start. And so I was a real handful during like there was a period probably like 11 to 14 where I was a pretty good player, and particularly fast. And yeah, I remember getting scouted by Gillingham Academy at one point, which was a pro club in England. But ultimately, I was never technically good enough to forge a real like serious career in football. But enjoy playing and continue to play for teams even to this day.
oh, awesome, awesome. And so you said, oh, you mentioned to me about discovering guitar at the age of 13. There's so many layers to you, Darren. You were quite academic. You were good in sports, and then you discover the guitar. Was that something that you had lessons for, or was it self-taught?
So yeah, guitar was self-taught primarily. Yeah, my uncle Eddie was a guitarist, and he was making a living playing across Europe as a singer, entertainer, doing like 1830s camps and all this kind of stuff.
Oh,
So at
wow.
an early age, he would also run like big family events. So I was always like in awe and impressed by my uncle, and that was probably my first influence of seeing someone entertaining with a guitar. And he actually gave me a guitar. I think it was on my fourth birthday, and it
Oh,
sat in my attic for years. And every now and then, my mum would go out to bingo or something, and I'd get my dad to get it down so we'd play it. And then it would sometimes go back up, and it was never, I just never had any real direction on it. And then around kind of 13, 12, 13, I started messing around, and I used to play with just one string because many of the strings were broke. So I learned all these songs. I used to play the Sex Pistols at the time, on a single string, and then I went to school and they started up a guitar club, and so I was like, you know what, I really want to learn to play the guitar. And so I went along. They taught me how to play "Daddy's Taking Us to the Zoo." I'm not sure if that's a globally recognized song, but anyway, it involves three chords: D, A, 7, and G. And they taught me it, and I learnt it super quick. And
wow.
the teacher even said, he was like, "Wow, not many people pick that up so quick. You should really practice." And I had this book from years ago that had like the 16 basic chords and a ton of songs. And I basically just spent hours in the next week. And I come back to the class the following week, and the teacher was like, "Oh wow!" Like he was amazed. And then I think the second week he told me I couldn't come to guitar club anymore, because I was too good.
Oh,
But and I like kind of I'd passed the level of the team, and I was like pushing forward too fast. So he said,
no.
yeah, you should just go and play on your own and practice. So I got the bug and was totally obsessed from that point.
Okay. So with your one string guitar, is that what you then use to practice so much if you're out of the guitar club? Because your teacher walks in on you one day and, it's like, oh, wow, you're awesome. And then offers you gigs and stuff. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Yeah. So obviously between guitar club and maybe by the age of from like 12 to 13, I basically just spent hours and hours and hours playing. I got obviously me and my brother were both playing, and then we got new guitars, and so both were really putting a lot of time and actually had the benefit of playing with each other. And so a lot of that was playing by ear. And so we would regularly like improvise over songs. We'd just put some music on and just like play over the top. And sometimes we would play together. My brother was more of a rhythm player and I was a lead player. So we basically just played and played and played all the time. So when I was at school, they used to have a practice room, and often during like breaks, I would just go in there and plug a guitar in or play my own guitar if I brought it to school. So one time I was there, and I remember I was soloing over some Bon Jovi, and I was playing, some good stuff. And then this teacher come in. He wanted to hear and see who was playing. And so he come in and then he said, "Oh, how long have you been playing? Who do you play with?" Asking me all these questions. And he was like a deputy teacher or a stand-in teacher. And and I said, "Yeah, I don't play with anyone. I play on my own. I just practice in." And then he said, "What are you doing on Saturday? We need a stand-in guitar player for my band, and we want you to come and play. We need someone who can play like that." And so so I told my dad, "I have a gig on Saturday. You need to take me." And so I went, and I remember they paid me £50 to play
Oh,
guitar for 2 hours. I was like made up. I thought this was amazing. And so that kind of begun the process. That become the process of then, all right, you know what? Actually, people will pay money for me to play guitar, which was something I never thought would happen. It was amazing.
amazing, amazing. So how then were you start playing gigs all over the place? You had school, you had your sports. Um, how were you balancing everything?
It's a good question. I mean, I'll be honest, I'd probably say that I wasn't really balancing it. School was probably the lower priorities, if I'm honest. Largely because I got good grades without really doing that much. I think I was always naturally fairly intelligent, or I picked up the basics pretty comfortably. So I was fortunate to never have to work that hard. But and so it made it easy for me to be able to then focus maybe on more interesting activities. But also the school I went to was not the most inspiring place. So I never had anyone who was like inspiring me to maximize my potential. I think I was just like a number that come through the school and will come out the school at some point. So in that sense, it never dawned on me to maybe try harder to get like the best grades. I could just get okay, good grades without really working hard. So so that also made it easier during that time to focus on playing football, gigs and teaching and doing all of the stuff that I was doing.
All the fun stuff apart from the the important stuff. I can relate. Now, but there was a turn in your career. You had a conversation with your brother that changed everything.
Yeah, so I mean, so obviously, I'm playing in bands, practicing 2, 3 times a week, several gigs at the weekend. I'm playing in a band, I'm playing in duos, I'm guesting, I'm teaching. So I was doing tons, and I was, a very good player. And everyone was saying to me, "Oh, you need to become a professional guitar player. This needs to be your path." And then there was a school in London, a rock school, that started offering a degree in guitar playing. And I was
Oh,
like, I want to be a professional session guitar player, and I want to go there and get like my education and really like round myself out, be truly taught. And so I'll be honest, and I looked at all the entry requirements, and I used to download all of the stuff, and I would basically make sure I could do all of it. And I was like, I just, there was a part of me that was like, could I really do it? But then I was talking to my brother, and he was 3 years older than me, and he had just gone to college, and he said, like, the problem is like, you need to guarantee you get a job at the end of this, and while music is good, you need to go forge a career that gives you options. You can always play music, you can always do these things, but and obviously we come from a family where no one went to college. My brother was the first one in our family to go to college, and so I thought, you know what, I am quite good at mathematics, statistics, good at chemistry, and sciences in general. So I then made the tough decision to say, you know what, yeah, I need to do that, and maybe I can still play music, but maybe a career in sciences is probably a better choice. So yeah, and that kind of gave me clarity at that point. I was like, yeah, okay, now that's my focus area. And so I then kind of shifted from being obsessed with music to being not obsessed with sciences, but just more, I'm clear on where my direction is.
Right. So you then I'm assuming sort of when you say shift, you took your schoolwork more seriously to be able to get yourself into university. Oh, college.
Yeah. So basically, yes and no, because I was still playing and I was still heavily involved, and I had a lot of commitments. I still enjoyed them. I mean, I think one of the things that I would touch on is that my parents gave me total freedom, um, and that's got good and bad elements to it. The good part, is obviously for a kid, I never felt pressure to get certain grades, to do certain things. The downside is, I didn't get good grades. I got okay grades, but they were good enough to get to college, luckily, but they weren't anywhere near my potential. But the positive aspect was that I was allowed to fail when perhaps it wasn't so important. Even though I know every parent out there is like, oh, my kids need to get the best GPA and the best this and the best that. The reality is, if you fail earlier in your life, then the reality is you're more prepared and you understand and feel the deep feeling of what failure means. Something relatively meaningful, not like super meaningful, because failing at college or failing in your job is a much bigger issue. So I look back on it now and realize, I remember the feeling of picking up my GCSEs and looking at it and going, oh. And then I remember, and then the same feeling again, I didn't learn from it, but the same feeling of looking at my A levels and going, like that doesn't represent me. And so when I went to college, that changed me completely. And I went to college like, yeah, once is a mistake, twice is a trend, 3 times ain't happening. And so I was significantly more focused. So I'm actually thankful I was allowed to fail than being forced to maybe get through. And then as soon as I'm away from home, maybe not having the same level of discipline.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of one of John Maxwell's books that says "failing forward," because you don't just fail. That we must allow people and our children to make those mistakes, because that's the only way they can learn. Otherwise, when you keep dictating to people, the life's lessons get lost along the way.
Exactly.
So you well, you get your A level. Or I just wanted to explain to our viewers what our GCSEs and A levels were. So in the UK, it's not a smooth flow as in the US, where whether you're passing or failing, you get to, well, not finish high school, but at least you get a high school education. In the UK, at 16, you write exams called the GCSEs, and that will determine what subjects or what school you get to go for your A levels. And then your A levels, which is the advanced levels, is the exams that you take, which will determine to the university or college that you get to. So Darren then gets himself into college. What I want to know, Darren, is I know at this time you don't have anyone to fall back in terms of finances at home. How did you support yourself through college?
Yeah, so this was one where I was pretty clear. As soon as I went there, I had a clear plan. So in the UK, back then, first thing is college was free. I know the people in the US are going to be like, "What do you mean free?" So I was one of the I was one of the last years where it was truly free, and not only free. If you came from parents of certain income, you actually got a grant that helped you towards some of your finances, books, etc., accommodation. And so I was really also fortunate that my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, we went to college together, and her father was covering her half of the rent. And then I said, okay, I can cover the other half of the rent. So here is my grant check, and that covers my rent for the year. But then I gave him the check, but realizing that I have no money, zero. So basically, as we drove actually to the apartment we ended up living in, I saw a sign outside a shop saying help needed. I turned up to the shop that evening and I said, can I speak to the manager? And I said, I see help needed. I said, help has arrived. And then the guy said, okay. So he had a chat with me upstairs, and yeah, I put overalls on and got started. And yeah, so I basically worked about 30 to 35 hours in a high-end food store, kind of like a King's or it was like a small exclusive store. We actually had a lot of celebrities like Paul McCartney and people like that would actually come and shop. So I was in there working 30 to 35 hours a week, and loved it, and that was my source of income to fund whatever I wanted to do. But it was yeah, it was great times. I really enjoyed it.
Amazing, amazing. I'm sure a lot of university or college students are watching it and saying, work, what is that? That is the way we did it back then. And Darren, so this is the part of the story I like. So you've looked at your GCSE results and you go, A-level results, you're like, come college, you are determined and you smash it. You get a first class degree, which is the equivalent of one of the cum laudes in cum laude here in the US. You get a first class degree in applied statistics. How did your career start?
So yeah, so when I was going through my studies, we had the opportunity of doing a co-op or we call it a placement year, which is like a co-op in the US. So and during that time, I was like unsure, but I spoke to some people who had done it before, and they said to me, yeah, but when you then finally go to apply for a job, you've got all this experience. You actually have not just only your education, but you have a year of working in industry, and it's more than an intern where maybe it's like a summer or something. This is a full 12, maybe even 18 months of working in a company. And they said, and often these companies will then hire you afterwards. So I decided, you know what, again, my objective was I have no safety net. I need to get employed. And I was like, if this increases my chances, then it sounds like fun. And then they would pay you at least. And again, I remember £11,500 for my placement. Yeah, and I was made up. I thought it was awesome. And so it was a great time. So I joined Quintiles, which is now called IQVIA. It's a contract research organization. And they employed me as a trainee statistician. And yeah, and honestly, it was the best time ever because, you know, although I went in there with huge anxiety, like, again, I was like, oh, I'm not going to be good enough. These people are going to be so good. And, you know, the reality is I went there and I just lapped up all this knowledge from all these fantastic people. And I was surrounded by so many great people that were way smarter than me, with way much more experience than me. But I just realized that they were so giving with their knowledge. And then that was the period where I started to realize that, yeah, I can do things. You know, I think I had that period of doubt. Even when I went to college, I had a period of doubt of like, oh, I'm not going to do well. These people are going to be so much smarter than me. And then I kind of uncovered that. But then when I went to work, it was the same anxiety again. Not anxiety, but just feeling of everyone's going to be so much better. I'm going to have to work so hard to be good here. But it ended up being just such a rewarding experience. I worked on so many different projects. You know, I look back on it now, I still refer to experiences from then, even in my current work, I share with, you know, with people at work. So yeah, it was a phenomenal, and I've got many people I made friends with there. I'm still friends with today.
Awesome. You're a great example of what we call do it afraid. That when imposter syndrome kicks in and you think you don't deserve it, or you think that you can't make it, or, you know, instead of staying back and you know, throwing in the towel, at least you go in and try. And when you try, you know, who knows, like you know, you went to college and you got your first class degree and you went in and into work and you did so well. So let's carry on with your career path. What then happens after you did your year out? You did your placement year, which is working whilst attending college. What happened after you finished college?
Yeah, so when I was at Quintiles, the head of the site that I was based on, he used to meet regularly with a lot of the kind of interns and placement students, and I built up a really good relationship with him. And then when I was at college, before I'd actually finished, he sent me a letter in my pigeonhole. There wasn't so much email then. His way of getting involved with me was to send a note to the college, and then it got put in my pigeonhole. So
Yes.
so I called him up, and then we had a chat and an interview, and then before I know it, I was then working or had an offer to work at Novartis, which is obviously one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. So I was also then like my objective again going back was I want to get a job, I want a career, and so to have landed a job was phenomenal. So I just felt so happy, and also to have someone that was not so yeah, sponsoring me to some degree. They kind of
Yes.
saw something in me, and then decided, I want to bring you to Novartis. So I joined again, same anxiety. Oh, the Novartis, but it's such a bigger company, and everyone's going to be even smarter and even better. This is going to be even tougher. But again, the same journey, to be honest, just tons of great people surrounding me that I could just suck the knowledge out of and add it
Yeah.
to myself, and great experiences. And yeah, I'll be honest, it was a phenomenal journey. And yeah, I progressed from running, working on trials to then leading large drug projects and submissions and technical projects, and just so much stuff that kind of got thrown to me, and just obviously progressed through the careers. And ultimately, over a 16-year period there, they took me from a entry level person to I think it was within 13 years to a VP. So they really
Wow.
did, like, from a development standpoint, they were phenomenal in providing me great opportunities and experiences to develop and grow.
Yeah, but that was because you also lent yourself to the process. You applied yourself and you were ready to learn. So I
Yeah, of
guess it was
course.
enough. Yeah, you were in the game, and you did your best. So going back to growing up, you've obviously now working. You're doing great. How come your circumstances? I want to talk about your circumstances growing up, and of course, growing up in some of these tough neighborhoods. How come that never swayed you? I mean, you could have easily gone the other way, fallen by the wayside. Like you said, you were seeing all these crimes on a day-to-day basis. You were hanging out with gang leaders. How come none of these swayed you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say the first big factor is moving at the age of 12 was an important age, right? So I think, I think adolescence in those environments is very different to pre-adolescence. So I think the first one is that I moved probably at a good time. But even
Right.
if I think about my life, even in All Hallows, where there was a lot of still exposure to drugs and uh, and not necessarily gangs in the same, but petty crime and things of that nature. They were still exposed to a lot of that. But if I, even when I can remember being in moments, hanging out with friends and others that were getting involved in things they shouldn't be getting involved in, and whatever. But I think when I look back on it, one is a competitiveness in me. I always wanted more. Like, not that I wanted more, but I always wanted to be more than what I was, the situation I was in. I always wanted to better myself. I think I've always had a curiosity to learn. And so
Okay.
I think I was never interested in just accepting what I have or what I'm doing. I always wanted to learn. And then I think ultimately I had a comfort of being me and not needing to fit in. I think when I look
Right.
back, and I see that, particularly in my daughter, I see the same trait. This steely, and my wife has the same thing of just being very comfortable in my own skin. And I was, when I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking, like, there was a period where, if you think about it, I was, hanging around with people. We were scrapping and fighting sometimes, and getting involved in things, playing a lot of football. So I was very sporty, but at the same time, I was into singing, playing the guitar. These are very eclectic things to be involved in, and yet I had friends from all different circles. So I never let it, like, I didn't define myself with one peer group. Like, oh, I'm part of the football kids, or I'm part of the kids from this estate, or whatever. I was a kid from everywhere. And I think that kind of yeah, I think that's part of it. I never felt like I needed to be part of anything. I'm happy to be me, and I'm happy to be friends with all these other groups. So I think
Yes.
when I look back on it, that piece around being comfortable with myself and not needing to fit in is probably a big part of it.
Awesome. Now we have people, you obviously paid your dues. You are where you are because you went in there, you put in the hard work. We now have people who think that success must come easy because our lives right now, we have the microwave lifestyle. Everything comes at the touch of a button. Everything should, we want it now. It's, we press
Yeah.
Google and we have the information or, and so they feel that, and also maybe social media has made it easy for people to think that they can go on Instagram and see people living all these lifestyles, whether it is true or not, and feel that, they are entitled to the same level of success, but without realizing the kind of hard work that goes into it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, my view is no matter what, there is no substitute to hard work. I mean, I've been fortunate to, interact with a number of people, CEOs of major top 500, Fortune 500 companies, as well as senior executives in a number of corporations. And I haven't met one that didn't have to work really hard to get where they are. So I think we are living in a little bit of an entitlement culture. But and I'll be interested to see how the next generation progresses. If I'm honest, I'm interested to see how it progresses. But the reality is, I think no matter what, working hard is the core of all of it. I don't think anything gets given on a plate. And in that doesn't matter whether you come from a poorer background or you come from even from a richer background.
Yeah.
You may, I think you've all probably seen the video of the guy who has everyone racing, and he's going to give them $100 depending on where they are. And we all maybe start different phases in the race, but we all have to run a race regardless. And so it may
Yes.
be easier for some more than others, but I've never met anyone, no matter what, whether they had a privileged background or a poor background, that didn't work incredibly hard to continue that race. So, yeah. So for me, I think that's the key bit, is that the core still remains the same. You have to work hard.
Work hard. Darren, so you've spoken to us about hard work. You have spoken to us about not letting growing up define you. You have spoken to us about just basically putting your all out there, pivoting from a child who wasn't doing very well in school to having that mindset to say, okay, now I want to do well. And of course, you do well in college. Now, for someone who's following, thinking, I'm on a similar track and I want to go into the corporates. How would you say that mentoring and sponsorship has helped shape your career?
That's a really good point, actually. So I think, and I would separate the two, mentoring versus sponsorship. So the
Yeah.
mentoring, I think, is whether it's coaching or mentoring, surrounding yourself with people who know more than you know or can guide you in some way is hugely important. And I think that again, I remember being, me and my brother have kind of both grown up in corporate roles, and so I would say kind of had each other to bounce ideas off, because when you don't come from a family where you can talk to Uncle Jim, who's a board member of this, or so and so who's a VP of this, you can't talk to anyone. You can talk to people about the situations, but you don't have anyone who has experience to necessarily share. So you need to quickly gain a circle of trust, both within your company and from your friends, that
Yeah.
can be that sounding board. So mentoring, I think, is really, really important. Coaching, similarly, to kind of shaped and guided. The
Yeah.
sponsorship piece is a separate piece, which is who's going to back you, and
Yeah.
how can you find people who are going to back you. And that's the piece that I would say is an element of serendipity. There's an element of luck attached to it, but there's also an element of you can play the odds in your favor. The more you connect, the more you reach out, the more you're curious, the probability that you meet a sponsor gets higher. So I think sitting there in a, with your head down or in an office somewhere, not talking to anyone, yeah, the probability is probably low. But if you're doing good work and you're getting out there and you're connecting, the chances that you find a sponsor are key. But sponsorship in the corporate world is a really important piece. You'll see many people who have achieved senior positions who will say, someone backed me. I did good work for someone. They saw the capability and the talent, and they backed me and gave me opportunities. And for sure, I've been the recipient of sponsorship, certainly in the more senior phases of my career, for sure.
Awesome. And what would you say has largely contributed to your success?
I would probably distill it into a few pieces, but the first one is I've worked hard. And when I say worked hard, I'll give more specifics, but I've always been humble to know what it is I don't know. So whenever I've taken on a role, and even when I think about my early, like more technically focused roles, I was very clear on, I don't know this, I don't know this, I don't know this. I could list off things that I'm like, yeah, I don't know them. So then I would put a very clear plan on how I'm going to learn them. And I would say, a fast learner and an aggressive learner. But I would very aggressively, let's say, like, because this was an anxiety for me. So this wasn't just because I want to be better, but this was just an anxiety. I need to get on top of these things.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's number one. The second one was I was curious. So once, I'm tackling these things, the anxiety kicks in where I'm like, well, what is it I don't know? I don't know. And then that curiosity, and then reaching out to people, and particularly people who are smarter than me, or I perceive them to be even smarter than me, and be like, oh, how do you handle this situation? And then suddenly I realized this is the treasure trove of information, of stuff that I don't know, that I can now steal and then add to my list of things I now know I don't know, or gain it from them. And I'll be honest, that become an infectious, almost like secret sauce. I was like, every single role I've ever taken on, whether it was a technical role, or I remember when I became manager, and I was like, I've never done a development plan for someone. I've never done a performance review. I've only had a performance review done on me.
Yeah.
Like, what would the most awe-inspiring performance review look like? Or what would the best development plan? So then I was like, yeah, I need to research that. I need to talk to people who are even better than me at doing it. What can I learn from them? And so all the way through my career, this thing of like attacking the stuff you're not good at, or you don't know, and then being really curious to surround yourself with people that enables you to discover things that you perhaps didn't even know you didn't know. And I would say, honestly, those two coupled with hard work has really been the key to all of the stages. And the funny thing is, I share this a lot with people, but they're the same. I approach new roles the same way every time. It's because no matter what role, you could be a CEO, you could sit there and go, all right, previously I was this role, now I'm a CEO, or I'm this position, and the same criteria. Okay, what is it? What's your maturity score 1 to 10 on your ability to communicate? What's the requirements? And then rank it and sit there and go, all right, now we need to start attacking these things.
Love it. That's so good. That is so good. That is so good. So, Darren, from a little boy growing up in some of the toughest neighborhoods that you have described, now you live in the suburbs of New Jersey. Was this a life that you ever dreamed of? Was this something that you ever aspired or saw yourself growing up, that I think I can do this. This is where I see myself. Or has this far exceeded anything that you ever thought?
Yeah, I mean, if you had told me even a tenth of what I've done, I would have said you're joking. So I'll be honest, I never had any aspiration, and I still tell people I kind of, in some sense, still don't. My focus, and I've got more comfortable with it, but my focus has always been to just improve and be a better version of myself. Every 6 months, I always check in with myself to go, am I growing? Am I developing? Am I becoming a better version of myself?
Yes.
If that then opens the doors to some new thing or gives me something else in my life, awesome. But if it doesn't, I'm happy, because it's about development. And at a young age, I didn't have any aspiration. I think when I got to like teenagers, my aspiration was to not be in this situation. That was it. It was simply like, I don't want to be in this situation, and I want to have some security. That safety, I want to have a safety net and not be worrying about, paying for bills and getting food and things like that. I just want to have a comfortable life. So I'll be honest, this has all been a journey of discovering what's possible.
Right.
So I'll be honest, even if you'd ask, I remember when I got my first job at Novartis, my brother called me and was like, well, where do you think you could go? Or what do you think you could do? And was talking about like my boss at the time. And I was like, I don't know. Like, maybe I could. I don't know. Like, I just don't know. And so I think when you don't come from an environment, this is the challenge of what they call intergenerational mobility. This is the challenge, right? You don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what you can achieve. And so for me, it's always been just daring to try something, and then just working hard and following the basic principles that I've established, which now I've seen them work. So they become more like operating models. I had to learn them or work them out, I would say, kind of on the fly. But but I honestly had no aspiration, and I'm just super proud and pleased of where things have ended. But I would never have predicted it, ever. I don't think any of my teachers would have predicted it either. I don't think my parents would have predicted it. I'm not sure, but yeah. So I'm just obviously grateful for where it currently is, and just thankful.
Amazing. Darren, there is a young boy in a council estate in England or in a project here in the US who has stumbled upon this video. They have seen your journey, and they see themselves in a young Darren. What would you say to them?
It's a really good question. I think my main message to them is believe, is to take some time to reflect and believe that anything is kind of possible. It may not feel that it is, but the world is full of examples where it genuinely is. And hard work is at the core of it. I think being curious, being willing to learn, being willing to kind of graft, and having some resilience. But at the end of the day, I think the key bit is to believe that something's possible. I would say, looking back, I didn't necessarily believe I didn't have confidence that I would be able to do things. And I've learned that you can. And my message to maybe, that kid, whoever he is out there, that you can genuinely do it. And I think that's my main message, that I would say, you genuinely can.
You can do it. You can do it. And Darren is an example. And Darren, finally, do you have a final message for our viewers before we finish off this interview?
Yeah, so my final message. So David Beckham, they used to say to David Beckham, how comes you do these free kicks so good? The bend it like Beckham free kicks. How do you do them so good? And he said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And I always remember that phrase. And so my final message to viewers, and maybe also to the little boy growing up, is the harder you work and the more you graft and the more you try to improve yourself day to day to day, the luckier you'll get.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Darren Weston, I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself and my viewers. You have been an amazing guest, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I am sure it will go a long way in helping somebody out there. And if it helps at least one person, I know our job today has been done. Thank you so much, Darren, for joining us. Viewers, this has been another edition of Against All Odds. I want to say thank you for watching, and share the video and follow us on our social media handles, Against All Odds on YouTube, Against All Odds on Facebook, and Against All Odds Chats with Sylvia on Instagram. Thank you for watching. Thanks again, Darren.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.